I belong to a country that I've never seen. I was born in exile, but I'm connected to it through my blood, my tears, my dreams and my hopes, passed down to me by my parents and to them by theirs. My country is Tibet, the land of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, the land of rich Tibetan culture and language, of centuries-old Tibetan Buddhism. I'm connected to it through the stories and memories of collective hardship, of painful experiences, as well as joy and eternal hope that binds us. One of such memories that connects me to Tibet is my late father, my pala, Lhageri Tije Namke Gyatso. Being a Tibetan, but above all, being the direct descendant of Tibetan kings and the grandson of a great man who fought as a general against the Chinese Qing occupation of Lhasa in 1910 to 12. My pala, a man of principle, integrity and courage. He was brought up, instilled with a sentiment of protecting his people, and hence in 1959, during the Chinese occupation of Tibet, he decided to stand for Tibet and the Tibetans. Pala gave up his family inheritance, his power, and decided to join the Tibetan uprising. He decided to support Chuchi Khantuk, the Tibetan guerrilla fighters. The Lhageri palace was turned into a battalion to challenge the Chinese imperialist fighters who called themselves the Chinese Liberation Armies. They were there to escort His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama safely to exile and to fight against the Chinese imperialist power. The Tibetan uprising was brutally crushed. My pala and his brothers were arrested. Pala suffered tremendous and unbearable torture through his 20 years, 6 months, 11 days of beatings, of enforced labor, malnourishment and solitary confinement. Yet a ray of positivity shone from him. While I could certainly see the scars from his chained wrist and ankle, he spoke of the beautiful alley of Lhasa when him and his fellow inmates would be chained and paraded across the alley of Lhasa so that the Tibetan bystanders would be warned of possible outcome if they join any form of counter-revolution. As Pala spoke about starvation in prison, at the same breath, he told me about one of the tastiest pak he's ever had. Pak is made out of Tibetan tsampa, roasted barley grounded. So he would tell me how during one of those parades, Tibetan ladies on roadside would carry fistful of paks in their apron and hand over to the Tibetan political prisoners. And he would tell me about his kitchen duties when he would get to sneak in and add extra ladle of watery porridge to his fellow inmates. Pala used to tell me also about his first wife, who suffered a lot herself because it was cultural revolution and she had to face the struggle session. She had her 4 daughters to take care of, yet she would gather herself up and take care of them herself and then go and meet Pala and her brothers at prison too. There was no sign of regret or remorse when he spoke of his life filled with sacrifice, suffering and struggle. There was a sense of pride in him when he spoke about his life, his sacrifices. There was a joy that he was free in exile and a rejuvenated grit that he can continue the struggle in exile and hope for better days for Tibet, that is, a free Tibet. Yet he passed away before that dream could be fulfilled. My pala's example is one of the many political prisoners around the globe who have been imprisoned and tortured for their political beliefs against an autocratic power. While there are many definitions of political prisoners, one of the criteria that is given by the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe shares a better light of who they are. So, according to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, political prisoners are someone whose detention violates basic guarantees in the European Convention on Human Rights, particularly freedom of thought, conscience and religion, freedom of expression and information, and freedom of assembly and association. They are those whose detention is imposed for purely political reasons, and the length or conditions of detention is out of proportion to the offense. He or she is detained in a discriminatory manner as compared to other persons. And finally, the detention is result of judiciary proceedings that are clearly unfair and connected with the political motives of the authorities. Guess who all were political prisoners? Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., and many more, whom we call the heroes of our times, who fought against an oppressive power in their struggle for freedom. One can't help but wonder, to subject someone to that kind of torture, he or she must have done something extremely horrible. And that reminds me of the song of Hlundup Thakpa. On the heads of sincere and truthful people, a black hat has been forcefully put on. For years and months under this black hat, they have suffered as if hell is on earth. A language that is more precious than jewels is hemmed in by 1,000 insidious means. For years and months in this state, the voice of 6 million Tibetans is gagged. For years and months, the sun is clouded. For days and nights, the moon is blackened. In this realm of strangled darkness lies the sorrow of people of the snowland. The black hat relates to a Tibetan proverb which means don't accuse an innocent of a wrongdoing. So Hlundup Thakpa, for this song, he was imprisoned for 6 years. After a whole year of detention before his trial without any access to legal representation, I served as the president of Gujusu Movement Association of Tibet. It's an organization of Tibetan political prisoners based in India. It was established in 1991 with an aim of creating an overall rehabilitation of Tibetan political prisoners in exile, and creating a common platform of Tibet advocacy for them and represent their fellow inmates and fellow Tibetan political prisoners back in Tibet. During my service, I was very fortunate enough to be able to interact with them, to understand the reason behind their advocacy, the reason behind their service and their sacrifice. And it's painful to know that they have been imprisoned and they have been tortured for simply exercising many internationally known human rights. And the advocacy of non-violence, which has been completely criminalized simply because of its political content. International media has no access in Tibet unless it's a guided tour, and any Tibetan who speaks without confirmation to the Chinese officials will be persecuted. And one of such example is of Tashi Wangchuk. He appeared in a documentary and an article by New York Times in November 2015, in which he spoke about the freedom of language, where he said that whether it's government or in school education level, Tibetan language must be allowed, must be used, and because of that, it was criminalized, and he was secretly abducted from his home without the acknowledgement of the family, who were informed only after 2 months. And after spending 2 years in detention, he was formally put up on trial, and he was sentenced to 5 years. 5 years for demanding freedom of language in Tibet, and he was charged with inciting separatism for demanding freedom of religion or freedom of language in Tibet. The primary purpose of torture is to extract information. Torture includes beating with sticks, electric pots, submersion, subversion, dogs, and exposure to extreme temperature and malnutrition. For women political prisoners, particularly girls and nuns, they are sexually assaulted. They are raped with electric batons, and many a times Tibetan political prisoners do not have any access to their family members, no access to trial or legal representation. And the other purpose of torture of Tibetan political prisoner is to instill fear in them, so that in future they are not able to gather courage to protest against Chinese Communist Party or their heartland policies. I've even heard of lack of drinking water in Chinese prison, especially during interrogation session, where according to some political prisoners, they had to drink sewage water or even their urine. For Tibetan political prisoners, their daily routine included hard labor, meager, unsanitary and unnutritious diet, bedding or the cell blocks that hardly provided shelter against the extreme weather, and the rudimentary sanitation. And Tibetan political prisoners, there have been cases of death in imprisonment. Many political prisoners, because of their subjection to extreme torture, some of them have been unable to bear that, tolerate that, hence leading to suicide as well in imprisonment. It is no wonder that the 16 pages long concluding observation of United Nations Committee Against Torture in 2015 on the China's 5th periodic report said the practice of torture and ill treatment is still deeply entrenched in the Chinese criminal justice system. Tibetans in Tibet take great risks to retrieve information about human rights abuses or protest and send it to us in exile. Lately, according to the report of Human Rights Watch, the case of Kuncho Jimba, who was aged 59, was of such a situation. Kuncho Jimba, he died in a hospital in Lhasa right after 3 months of being transferred to the hospital without informing his parents. Many political prisoners lingers for months and years in a complete debilitated state before they die in a very horrific and sorry manner. Early release of Tibetan political prisoners on medical parole due to their extremely weak physical condition of almost near to death position is the only sensitivity that the Chinese police show, but not lessening the systematic abuse and torture of the Tibetan political prisoners. Even if Tibetan political prisoners, they complete their imprisonment, it doesn't assure them freedom. The post-incarceration of Tibetan political prisoners is extreme, where they face intimidation, they face lack of job or work, or the Tibetan monks are unable to go back to monasteries, and they are unable to begin a new life, and they are constantly being inspected, they're constantly under surveillance. So Tibetan political prisoners, even if they they are released from prison, they are still not free. The impact of imprisonment lasts lifetime for not just the political prisoner himself or herself, but his or her family members too. I recall meeting Miko Nai, who is one of the most well-known Burmese political prisoner, and he told me that the most difficult thing for him to endure during his 20 years of imprisonment was the solitary confinement, because he said that raised a sense of fear and insecurity in him, and that, he said, lasted many years to come. I think it's important to address the impact of trauma upon Tibet, upon political prisoners in general. However, post-traumatic stress disorder is something that has not been addressed or openly discussed within the Tibetan community, and also we haven't noticed strong and serious cases of PTSD within our community. However, it's of course the traces of PTSD is always visible amongst Tibetan political prisoners. Another reason why we need to focus on this issue is the threat that it poses on human rights around the world. And in many of the political imprisonment cases that I've seen, these Tibetan political prisoners or other political prisoners that I've met, they are simply exercising their political right, which are guaranteed in their basic human rights. All it takes is for an authoritative regime to just take your right to live with basic guarantees away from you, and your basic freedom, your basic human rights of your freedom to expression, thought, or assembly is taken away from you on a span of few seconds. When your basic rights are criminalized, an environment of false sense of security is created, where one starts to believe that as long as you follow the rule, nothing wrong is going to happen to you. However, you do not know when your existence itself becomes a threat to the propaganda of an oppressive regime. When that happens, your gender, your age, your status, nothing can save you. Even a 6-year-old can be imprisoned, like with the case of the 11th Panchen Lama of Tibet. The 11th Panchen Genduchok Nyima, one of the most important religious figure of Tibetan Geluk religious tradition, is one of the youngest political prisoners of the world. At the age of 6, after 2 days of being recognized as the 11th Panchen Lama, reincarnation of the 10th Panchen Lama, he experienced enforced disappearances. We do not know where he is, and for the past 25 years, his case of enforced disappearance has been pending at the United Nations, whether it's at the UN Working Group of Enforced and Involuntary Disappearance or the UN Right of Children. A US data analytics firm called Freedom House, for a 3 straight year, called Tibet the second least free country in the world next to Syria. However, according to the latest finding, Tibet shares the title of the least free country in the world with Syria. I genuinely believe, and so does every Tibetan, that our vision is for peace, freedom and democracy. And for us to find a true healing, there is need for those who perpetuate torture to take accountability for their actions. Only when our present is rid of such evil can we find peace in past. The promise of never again was perhaps made with the true conviction of responding, never failing to respond to any form of atrocities. However, I genuinely believe that for the past 60 years, that promise has failed. And from our side, we will continue to fight for justice. We will continue to raise our voice and continue our Tibet advocacy as long as Tibetans inside Tibet continue to fight. We will continue to be the voice of the silenced.